Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion on this Thursday morning. Yesterday, a little bit of pressure on the markets. We could feel that. And actually, a lot of that pressure really started from some of those various names. Same thing is occurring today, where you've got just a couple of names, earnings are out, and that pressure specifically on certain names pulling on some of these markets. Give you a great example. Yesterday, obviously, it was Visa that was really pulling on the Dow itself. And the Dow actually finished the day, it was down 150, 160 points for the majority of the day. We gave up that 36,000 level in the Dow. We finished the day down about 211. Matter of fact, the volatility index itself, 16 and a quarter to 17 and a quarter. So fairly tight range. We had a little bit more volatility when you look at what was going on with the NASDAQ itself. And it was down significantly throughout most of the session, actually finished the day down about 50 points. I look over at the volumes yesterday again. In the derivatives world, I'm looking at those option volumes, 45.2 million contracts trading yesterday. So again, well over that 40 million mark, and we just continue to be very, very strong. Matter of fact, November right now, we are averaging about 45.5 million contracts per day. So pretty extraordinary, especially when you look back to October, we averaged just under 40 million contracts a day. So we are on a pretty strong pace so far. Apple yesterday, 2.3 million contracts. Tesla, about 2 million contracts. Ford, 1.7 million contracts. And Lucid, 1.1 million contracts. Gives you a little bit of an idea of where a lot of that activity has been flowing towards. And Apple's always one of those names that's somewhere in the top 5, usually in the top 2. But I'll tell you what, we've seen a lot more of Lucid. We've seen some Tesla. We've seen some of the other names in the EV space as well, participating in that big, huge, that upper end of what are some of the most active options that we are seeing. We're seeing more and more in the EV space getting towards those numbers. So 10-year, right around 1.6. Of course it is. It seems like it's always right around there. Yesterday, we were trading in terms of crude right around 79. Actually finished the day closer to 78.5. So we've kind of given up. And we've been talking about this rotation that we have seen in the energy space from energy back over towards the EV space. And as we've seen less and less activity in that energy space, we've watched the price of crude just kind of steadily settle down a little bit after getting all the way up towards that 85 number. Keep a close eye on that. And obviously there's a lot going on. The president's talking about oil and gasoline prices and all of the rest. So certainly that's a focal point. A lot of people talking about it more and more, but we have seen that here when we stopped seeing the energy options trading almost like a faucet, almost completely stopped seeing a lot of that energy hitting after it had been hitting day in and day out for the previous 12 months. So something that really did stand out, and it certainly stands out for me because of that transition that we have seen here in the derivatives market. So yesterday, when I look across all the different sectors, really what stood out the very most, energy. Energy started the day down, and then it got down to about 1%, actually finished the day down a couple of percent, down nearly 2% yesterday. And we talk about that 78.5 level after not too long ago being 81, 82, 83, and as high as 85. That shows you why we are seeing a little bit more pressure coming on in some of those energy names. Earnings continue to roll. You look at something like a TJX yesterday, 6-7% to the upside. Also, you can see a name like Moderna that was up 4%. Tesla was up close to 4%, not quite, a little bit less than that. Apple was up about 2% yesterday, but a lot of weight from names like Peloton. Obviously, I mentioned Visa as well. Target down about 4% post earnings. A lot of the concerns about some of the different pressures in certain areas in labor and pricing power and all those kinds of conversations. PayPal down about 4.5% yesterday as well. The Chinese names in general under pressure. PDD, JD, Baidu, the usual suspects. Throw in Trip.com, all down yesterday, a little bit lower. And the beta names in energy, of course, they are beta when it means that you're going to the upside, but also to the downside. APA, you look at Valero, you look at Marathon Oil, Occidental, those kinds of names, all under a little bit of pressure yesterday. So as we get into today, pandemic lows for these jobless claims, although they were a little bit higher than expected, still pandemic lows in terms of that, and again, underneath that 300,000 level. So when we get into today's market, a lot of the influence that we were seeing is certainly on the earnings space itself. So we continue to keep track of that. We look at the Dow almost completely flat in the pre-market. I mean, literally almost completely flat. A lot of that because it's not quite reading some of the different areas, but NASDAQ looked like it was going to open up pretty strong, up about 90 points. We opened up about 40 points. It's steadily sold off since. And the last I looked, we were down about 50 points on the NASDAQ. We have very rapidly lost points in terms of the Dow. We were down 90, then 110, 150, 200. Last I looked, about 235 points to the downside. It's names like Visa definitely pulling on it. Cisco pulling on the market big time today, a huge contributor to why we are seeing some of that pressure on the markets. Also throw in Salesforce, throw in a little bit of Disney, throw in some Chevron as oil's getting pulled back, and you get the idea. That all leads to us being down well over 200 points, at least for right now in the first hour of trade. Earnings do continue to roll on. We take a look over at NVIDIA early on, was up about 9%, but as I mentioned, Cisco down about 8%, so a little bit of a balancing act there. So crude still in the 78s. I look at the 10-year, a little bit below that 1.6, but still hanging in that same sort of a range that we've been talking about. Volatility continues to be floating around, but getting closer and closer to those mid-17s after yesterday. And we really were in a tight market yesterday, but we look at the volatility index yesterday, around 17 and a quarter, 1730 today, a little bit higher than that. But we'll see how that plays out as we get a little deeper into this session. And if we see this continued sell-off, I'm sure we're going to start seeing volatility pushing and maybe even getting into the 18s, maybe even a little bit higher. Bitcoin, 59,000, so a little bit of pressure there. Technology started off strong, it slipped. Semiconductors were up nearly 3%, they have slipped. They were still up strong, all-time highs, but about 2% after being up closer to 3%. Energy, pressure immediately, and on about a 1% move to the downside. Financials down about 0.5%. So when we look at some of the movers, I mentioned NVIDIA, that's one of those names, down, up about 10% on the day. AMD following that, Xilinx also, Marvell, a lot of those semiconductors participating, not just a single name, AMD and all the rest all chipping in as well. One of the bigger names, and John highlighted this, and I believe he had it for unusual just the other day on the halftime report, but take a look at what's going on with Macy's. Now, stock's up 20%. Why is that? Well, I can think of a couple of different reasons. First of all, the earnings were strong. The guidance was strong. All of that was there, but that type of thing has happened in the past. The other side of the coin is we had that monster buying of Macy's ahead of their earnings, expecting something similar to what we are seeing today. And on top of that, how about that huge short interest that Macy's continues to have? All of that contributing to this giant move to the upside of about 20%, just a massive move. Cisco, as I mentioned, that's down about 9%. PDD, Baidu, those Chinese names, down 4 or 5% as well. So contributing a little bit to that pull that we are seeing on the markets, at least right now. We'll see how that plays out. Speaking of pull, I got two names that when they hit were absolutely flying to the upside, but they have corrected significantly from that moment. So this is a time where it gives you an opportunity to kind of poke around and look and see, are there other ways that might be even a smarter way to position for something like this if these are of any kind of interest. So I'm looking at the unusual option activity today in NVIDIA. That's number one. The stock was trading just under 325. Now, I'm pointing that out because the stock has pulled back significantly from that area. It was even higher than that. But 27,000, 27,000 of the November 330 calls were purchased today. 27,000 of those calls were purchased today. That was with the stock trading closer to 325. It did slide, and as far as I know, last I looked, it had slid significantly from that level. So that gives an opportunity to take a look and see if there are better opportunities out there. Maybe there are. We'll take a little look-see. Matter of fact, Qualcomm's my next one. So we've got a lot of chips. We talked about semiconductors being very hot. This transition that we are seeing from some of the certain other names and back over to some of these semiconductor names as they hit all-time highs. Qualcomm. Now this again, stock was trading just underneath 188 at the time, early in the session. We had a buyer of 15,000 of the November 190 calls. Those are going for about 73 cents up to about $1.80. Stock has pulled back significantly from that level. There might be better opportunities. This is where hopefully people can be educated. If you're not educated, you need to be educated in the derivatives markets. We are one of those great places that does provide that here at Market Rebellion. We've got unbelievable folks out there that mentor and educate and do such a great job. Really, really proud of what we do there to try to help people because this is such a growth area. As I mentioned, You look at what we're talking about on a day in and day out basis of these volumes that we're seeing. 45.2 million contracts yesterday, a great example of that. We just continue to see the growth in the derivatives markets. It's not slowing. As a matter of fact, it's accelerating. So it is an area that you're going to want to have a little bit more knowledge of. And there's so many different ways you can do it on the internet or books or whatever, but definitely be educated. Folks, have a great day of trading. We will see you tomorrow.